To protect against the worst happening, aviation has safety barriers in place to prevent an aircraft from ever getting close to crashing. An accident only occurs if several of these barriers are broken at once. In 1990, on the flight of Avianca 052, we saw what happens when, one by one, these safety barriers were broken down in a way which allowed safety margins to be reduced to zero, and the results were devastating. On January 25, 1990, an Avianca Airlines flight is minutes away from pushing back at Medellin, in Colombia. It's an international flight to New York JFK, which has just made a short hop from Bogota before it travels over to the US. As boarding is completed and the final bags are loaded, Avianca 052 is ready to depart. On board are 149 passengers and 9 crew. What many don't realise though is the amount of planning that goes into executing just one international flight. In fact, airlines have entire departments dedicated towards the planning, known as flight dispatch. It takes responsibility for the route planning, fuel loading, weight and balance, and weather information. The dispatcher shares the responsibility with the pilots, so let's take a look at just some of the work which has gone into this flight. Once Avianca 052 departs Medellin, Air Traffic Control will direct it to intercept the planned route, tracking north via an oceanic route over Bimini in the Bahamas before turning north and flying via Atlantic Route 7, Jet Airway 174, and thence JFK. The Boeing 707 will burn 55,520 pounds of fuel, but it's also required to carry several additives. 9,310 pounds are included for holding and reserve requirements, while fuel to an alternate airport, in this case Boston Logan, is also carried, another 7,600 pounds, bringing the total required for the flight to 79,930 pounds. In the end, 81,000 pounds of fuel were loaded onto the aircraft, adding the average weight of the passengers and their bags, as well as the empty weight of the plane, produces a takeoff weight of 258,800 pounds, and a centre of gravity position at 28%, all within limits for a takeoff from runway 36. The weather at Medellin is fine. Over in the United States though, the flight may encounter some difficult conditions. There are 2 cold fronts extending along the eastern US, resulting in overcast, rainy conditions in both New York and Boston. With an almost 5-hour flight time though, the conditions will be evolving as the flight progresses. Pilots are in continuous consultation with flight dispatch throughout international flights, as weather changes and air traffic control requirements vary. In the left seat is Captain Lorenzo Cavidia, an experienced long-haul operator with Avianca, having accrued around 16,000 flight hours. He's operated 14 flights between Colombia and JFK over the previous 12 months. Assisting him is First Officer Mauricio Klotz. He's 28 and has been with Avianca for just under 4 years. He's quite new to the Boeing 707, with just 64 of his 1,800 hours on type. His initial line check though was on a flight from Bogota to JFK, just 1 month ago. An experienced flight engineer also joins the crew. Matias Miano is 45 and has a total flight time of around 10,000 flight hours, with 3,000 on the Boeing 707. Avianca 052 enters Miami's airspace at 17:28 Eastern Standard Time. It's given an altitude adjustment up to flight level 370, 37,000 feet. As the flight proceeds northbound, it will be flying into increasingly congested airspace. With the weather along the eastern seaboard still marginal, delays occur as air traffic control requires wider gaps between aircraft, and the possibility of missed approaches or go-arounds are increased. The delays in the terminal area filter all the way back to Avianca 052. At 1904, the Boeing 707 is placed in a holding pattern by air traffic control overhead Norfolk Airport in Virginia. An aircraft executes a holding pattern by flying a racetrack-style shape over a waypoint. Doing so allows air traffic control to buy time as they clear aircraft further forward in the queue. Flying a holding pattern places very little extra workload on the pilots, as it's flown automatically by the autopilot, but flying around in circles still burns fuel, so calculations need to be made to ensure they are still well within their margins. We don't have any cockpit voice recorder transcript until later in the flight, but we know that Avianca 052 continues to hold for another 19 minutes. After being provided with onwards clearance, they're directed to hold for a second time over Boton intersection near Atlantic City, then a third 39 miles south of JFK at waypoint Cameron. In the meantime, they descended to 11,000 feet, 052 just one part of the flow of traffic inbound to New York. 052 has an expect further clearance time of 21:05. This is not an estimate for when the flight will exit the holding pattern, rather a guide to be used in the case of a radio failure. Nevertheless, the time has already been pushed back by more than 30 minutes. And while we don't know exactly what is occurring on the flight deck, the first officer calls ATC to advise they're beginning to run low on fuel.
Well, I think we need priority. We're passing.
Roger. How long can you hold, and what is your alternate airport?
Yes, sir. We'll be able to hold about 5 minutes. That's all we can do.
Roger. What is your alternate?
We said Boston, but it is full of traffic, I think.
Say again your alternate?
It was Boston, but we can't do it now. We're running out of fuel now.
Whatever has occurred in the cockpit, the pilots have clearly now realized that they only have enough fuel to make it to New York. They can't hold any longer, and they can't make it to their alternate. But from the controller's perspective, somehow, Avianca 052 has gone from perfectly normal operations to an almost emergency level fuel state. Assisting him is a handoff controller he calls Approach Control in New York.
Avianca 052, just coming up on Cameron, can only do 5 more minutes in the hold. Think you'll be able to take him, or I'll set him up for his alternate?
What's his speed now?
I'm not too sure, to be quite honest with you. Holding speed.
Slow him to 180 knots and I'll take him. He's radar 3 southwest of contact and I'll put him on a 40-degree heading.
180 on the speed, radar contact, and I'll put him on a 40-degree heading.
The handoff controller has been proactive and has organised an onwards clearance for Avianca 052, but in the rush, he missed the most important part of the first officer's radio call, that 052 does not have enough fuel to reach its alternate airport. This information would be critical for New York Approach, as it means 052 requires as much priority as possible. But as the New York controller leaves the conversation, he believes they're far from an emergency situation.
Avianca 052 Heavy, clear to the Kennedy Airport via heading 040. Maintain 11,000, speed 180.
Roger, heading 040, 11,000, speed 180 knots, Avianca 052.
And Avianca 052, contact New York Approach 118.4 now, please.
118.4, Avianca 052. New York Approach, Avianca 052, Heavy, we have ATIS information, Yankee, with you, 11,000.
Avianca 052, Heavy New York Approach, thank you. Reduce speed to 180 if you're not already doing it. You can expect an ILS 22 left. Altimeter 2969. Proceed direct near park.
For the next several minutes, along with other traffic, Avianca 052 will be vectored with descents and headings directing it towards runway 22 left at JFK. At 20:55, the cockpit voice recording begins in the flight deck.
Avianca 052, traffic in your turn. 12 o'clock, 5 miles eastbound at 6,000.
No contact. Okay, we have it.
Avianca, we have the traffic in sight, thank you.
6,000. 220, no?
220.
Avianca 052, I have a wind shear warning for you. At 15, an increase of 10 knots at 1,500 feet, and then an increase of 10 knots at 500 feet, reported by a 727.
Thank you very much, Avianca 052.
What is he saying, wind shear?
He is advising us that a 727 reported wind shear at 500 feet, exceeding 10 knots.
It's been like this all the time.
Important to note here is that the radio calls are being spoken in English, but much of the intra-cockpit conversation is in Spanish, and has been translated into English by the accident report. What will become important later in the flight is the language barrier between the crew and air traffic control, as well as difficulties this creates within the cockpit. As the flight is vectored down to 5,000 feet though, the crew become aware that since they have so little fuel, they need to take extra precautions in the case of a go-around. The flight engineer prompts the pilots to take a look at the procedure.
When we have less than 1,000 pounds in any tank, it is necessary.
Yes, sir.
The go-around procedure is stating that the power is to be applied slowly and to avoid rapid accelerations and have a minimum nose-up attitude.
To maintain what?
Minimum nose-up attitude. That means the least nose-up that you can hold.
This thing is going okay. Then flaps to 25 position and maintain VREF plus 20.
With less than 1,000 pounds of fuel left in some of the tanks, the 707 will land with less than Boeing's recommended minimum of 7,000 pounds. We'll look later at how the pilots let the fuel state get so dire, but important now is that they don't pitch up too aggressively in the case of a missed approach, as the G-force could cause the engines to become starved of fuel. The 707 is vectored in a wide pattern around to runway 22 left, air traffic control not aware of its perilous state.
Are we going to intercept the localizer at 2,000?
Yes, the initial approach altitude is 2,000, or according to ATC.
They got us. They're already vectoring us.
Accommodating us ahead of...
What?
They're accommodating us.
They already know that we are in bad condition.
No, they are descending us.
1,000 feet.
Ah, yes.
They're giving us priority.
Avianca 052 Heavy, you are 15 miles from the outer marker. Maintain 2,000 until established on the localizer. Cleared ILS 22 left.
Cleared ILS 22 left. Maintain 2,000 until established. Avianca 052 Heavy.
2,000.
Select ILS on my side.
The ILS on number 1, 110.9 is set. For 2,000 feet.
Localizer is alive.
Give me flaps 14.
We are 13 miles from the outer marker. Flaps 14.
Navigation number 1. Did you already set flaps 14? No?
Yes, sir, you're all set.
052 follows the ILS approach to runway 22 left. They're further slowed down by air traffic control, who request them to maintain a speed of 160 knots.
Kennedy Tower, Avianca 052 Heavy established, 22 left.
Avianca 052, Heavy. Kennedy Tower, 22 left. Your number 3 following 727 traffic on the 9er mile final.
Avianca 052, roger.
Can I lower the landing gear yet?
No, I think it's too early now. If we lower the landing gear, we have to hold a very high nose attitude.
The biggest threat to 052 on this approach is wind shear. At 1,000 feet, there's a headwind of 60 knots for runway 22, but this decreases to 20 knots at the surface, creating significant turbulence for the pilots to deal with on short final, as well as a tendency for the plane to undershoot the glide slope.
Lower the gear.
Gear down.
Give me 40.
40.
Mode selector approach. Landing checklist.
Landing check. Speed brake lever.
Full forward.
Spoiler switches.
On.
Engine start control selectors. On. No smoking switch. On.
Avianca 052, 22 left wind, 090 at 20. Clear to land.
Cleared to land, Avianca 052 Heavy.
The flight engineer completes the landing checklist, and the 707 makes its final approach to the runway.
This is the wind shear.
Glide slope.
Sink rate 500 feet.
The wind shear is causing the approach to become unstable. The captain struggles to keep the plane on the glide slope, with no sign of the runway in sight.
I don't see it. I don't see it.
Give me the landing gear up. Landing gear up. Request another traffic pattern.
Executing a missed approach, Avianca 052 Heavy.
With the approach unstable, and the crew unable to see the runway, they have correctly decided to go around. However, what would usually be a non-event has now put the aircraft into a dire situation. The 707 is now running on fumes, but air traffic control needs to vector them for another approach.
Avianca 052, you are making a left turn, correct, sir?
Tell them we are in emergency.
2,000 feet.
That's right, to 180 on the heading, and we'll try once again. We're running out of fuel.
What did he say?
Maintain 2,000 feet, 180 on the heading. I already advised him we're going to attempt again.
Advise him we are in emergency. Did you tell him?
I already advised him, yes.
The first officer has still not explicitly stated the emergency to air traffic control. It may seem like semantics, but declaring an emergency would turn all of ATC's attention towards Avianca 052, likely allowing for an expedited circuit for another approach. The captain, meanwhile, with the stress of the situation and a limited English vocabulary, seems to be having trouble understanding ATC instructions, asking for his FO to repeat them back. Air traffic control transfers 052 back to the approach frequency.
Avianca 052 Heavy, New York, you good evening. Climb and maintain 3,000. Advise him we do not have fuel.
Climb and maintain 3,000, and we're running out of fuel, sir.
Okay, fly heading 080.
Fly heading 080, climb to 3,000. 3,000 feet, please.
Did you advise him we don't have fuel?
Yes, sir, I already advised him. 180 on the heading, and we're going to 3,000 feet, and he's going to get back to us.
Okay. And Avianca 052 Heavy, going to bring you about 15 miles northeast, and then turn you back onto the approach. Is that fine with you and your fuel?
I guess so, thank you very much.
What did he say?
15 miles in order to get back to the localizer.
The misunderstanding continues. ATC is taking them out for a 15-mile circuit to fit them in with the flow of traffic, but the 707 simply doesn't have enough fuel to fly this far out. It's not until 3 minutes later that the pilots request for a turn back onto the approach.
Can you give us a final now, Avianca 052 Heavy?
Avianca 052, affirmative, sir. Turn left heading 040. 040.
040, Avianca 052 Heavy.
Give me a ball.
040, okay, that's fine.
The pilots begin to configure the aircraft for its second approach. Doing so increases the drag, the power required from the engines, and fuel required from the tanks.
In Avianca 052, fly heading of 360, please.
Okay, we'll maintain 360 now.
Okay, and you're number 2 for the approach. I just have to give you enough room so you make it without having to come out again.
Okay, we're number 2 and flying 360 now.
This one radio call sums up the misunderstanding which has been occurring between air traffic control and the pilots. ATC are simply not aware of how dire the fuel situation is, while the pilots believe they're doing all they can to request priority. 1 minute later, with 052 still 20 miles away from the airport, the inevitable happens. The Boeing 707's engines begin flaming out.
Flame out on engine number 4.
Flame out on it?
And flame out on engine 3. Essential on number 2 and number 1.
Avianca 052, we just lost 2 engines, and we need priority, please.
Avianca 052, turn left, heading 250, intercept the localizer.
Roger.
Select the ILS.
ILS, it is on the number 2.
Select the ILS, let's see. Avianca 052, you're 15 miles from the outer marker. Maintain 2000 until established on the localizer. Cleared for the ILS 22 left.
Roger, Avianca.
Did you select the ILS?
It is already on 2.
This is the end of the cockpit voice recording. Likely moments later, the 2 remaining engines also flame out, leaving Avianca 052 powerless over the skies of New York. It crashes 19 miles to the northeast of JFK, severely damaging the fuselage, breaking it into 3 sections, killing 65 of the 149 passengers and 8 of the 9 crew, including all 3 of the flight crew. We always talk about air crashes being due to a combination of factors. The accident report of Avianca 052 pointed towards 3 areas: the flight planning, the pilot performance, and the handling by air traffic control. The 3 combined to produce catastrophe. But how do we know that a crash like this couldn't happen again? It appears that simple misunderstandings led to the disaster, but in fact, there were numerous barriers in place to protect against a crash like this from ever happening. The accident report found several inadequacies in the flight planning, including out-of-date weather reports, incorrect takeoff weight figures, and lack of reserve fuel for traffic holding. But most significant was the failure of the pilots and dispatchers when the plane was in flight. Normally, with delays into an airport, most airlines and pilots would communicate and calculate what is known as the latest diversion time. This is one of these barriers of safety. It's a fairly simple calculation, which begins with a minimum landing fuel required at the alternate airport. Adding on the flight fuel to reach the alternate, plus any reserves, gives the diversion fuel level. If the plane's fuel gets to this stage, it'll abandon plans for an approach at the destination and divert to the alternate. However, for Avianca 052, this did not occur. Their first radio call to ATC regarding fuel was that they already did not have enough to proceed to the alternate. We don't know why the pilots didn't make these calculations, or communicate them to air traffic control. But part of the reason may have been that Avianca did not provide a minimum landing fuel to its pilots, thus allowing the safety barrier to be overcome. Communication in general was also an issue, with the word emergency not communicated to ATC even once, while a breakdown of communication occurred several times within the cockpit. The accident report pointed to these as the 2 key factors which led to the crash. The idea of crew resource management is in place to prevent against communication breakdowns, and since the crash of Avianca 052, it's been developed significantly, training pilots to communicate in a way which aids situational awareness and decision making. Air traffic control procedures were also addressed in the wake of Avianca 052, with controllers now able to declare emergencies on behalf of aircraft and handling them as such, allowing controllers to be at another layer of safety even if doubt over the situation exists. While air traffic flow management systems allow information about aircraft to be passed seamlessly between control centers, meaning pertinent information, like lack of holding fuel, can be passed on easily and without error. Tragically, the barriers that were in place to ensure the safety of flight failed in the case of Avianca 052. It's not often that these barriers are defeated in such a catastrophic way, leading to the deaths of 73 people. But it does show why continuous improvements in safety were and are still critical to the aviation industry.